Hello, welcome back to Bonaventure Time. Today, I'm just making a response to a question someone asked me on Cartesian method and phenomenology. So I'm hoping to give as thoughtful a response as I can, and I hope it helps. And by the way, if you guys just honestly have any questions that you want to ask me that are shorter, or I don't even have to make a video, maybe I can give you a reply just in the comments. Or if you just have a thought that you want a specific video made on, just honestly comment, and I'll do my best to give you as thoughtful a response as I can. And if I can't respond it, if I don't know it, I will give you the resources or lead you to someone who I think could thoughtfully respond to your question and answer it. So with that in mind, I want to respond to the question was, is Cartesian really any different, or is phenomenology really any different from Cartesian methodology? Which I've argued it is in previous videos, but yeah, it's one of those things that it does seem rather very similar, and I've argued that they have different methods, and the person asking this question bought that yeah, they're convinced by that is a different method, but it was ultimately asked, is it really come to any different ends, right? Does it really come to any of objective reality for phenomenology? So yeah, I'm just gonna try to show what is the key differences and what is another background for why phenomenology is objective, so to speak, or at least in the realist phenomenologist. So we'll start with Descartes and kind of recalling his method. He uses a doxa of belief, meaning doubting. Doxa is the Greek word for doubt. It also has the meaning illusory. And this is something that's not new to philosophy. Descartes wasn't really original with the idea of doubting, right, reality. Skeptics did that way back in the 300, 200 BC. The pre-Socratics, right, they had works. Plato in his divided line analogy, right, he doubts material things, that they're mere shadows and they're eluding us, right? It's illusory. Doxa is actually one of the words he uses in his divided line analogy in the Republic. So it's not really something new, but what kind of is in some way new is the way Descartes goes about it and formulating it and saying, I doubt everything. The only thing I don't doubt is my existence, because I think, therefore I am. So those are two things I want to kind of hone in on. A doubting everything, reality is just doubted as a presupposed, or a presupposition. And then I think, therefore I am, how he formulates that. I want to talk about that for just a couple seconds. So what's interesting about Descartes, and we'll see Husserl differs from him in this manner, Descartes formulates it as a logical proposition. When he says, I think, therefore I am, you can see it's like premise one, I think, conclusion, I am, right? And this is a key difference from Husserl, who just says, I think I am, right? It's something self-evident. It's not this logical proposition or something that needs to be demonstrated, right? It's really just, I think I am. A conscious subject exists, right? This is self-evident. It doesn't need to be tested, right? And the phenomenologists have this really interesting concept of consciousness presupposing a living body, or a living body presupposing a consciousness. So where Descartes would doubt reality and if anyone exists, the phenomenologists actually in fact don't. And this is through their work of intersubjective acts. Stein talks about this in her theory of empathy. I actually don't think I really went into it in my video on empathy, and I might make a new video on it kind of talking about this. But yeah, anyway, the essential aspect to this idea of the living body for them is that it's something they call point zero. So right when I move my body, my conscious perspective of reality moves with me, right? So certain objects may move away from me, have certain difference, but the body, there's this point zero between my consciousness and the body, because as I move, I am my perspective, my consciousness, what is in contact with my consciousness, or in correlation, so to speak, moves along with the living body, right? So there's a living body presupposes a consciousness, which is something different from Descartes in his meditations, right? He talks about looking outside a window and seeing people walk around, or maybe this was a different Cartesian, but nonetheless using Cartesian method and saying, right, how they could be robots for all I know, right? The body doesn't indicate anything. There's this mind-matter dualism that Descartes goes, right? Because it's only I think, therefore I am, right? So Ari Husserl differs in not using that as a logical principle, but he's also differing in that there's this mind-matter harmony, right? Living body presupposes consciousness. They're not separated, right? So he's already in contact where Descartes would always actually doubt even whether this is my hand. Husserl is saying it's self-evident that I exist, and this hand is actually my hand because it's a living body that presupposes a consciousness, right? So there's a huge difference there, and in some ways you can argue to an objective reality. Although if you're an analytic, you like Bertrand Russell, like a positivist, you could say, well, maybe this is just sense datum or just appears to be my hand, right? That'd be like a skeptical route. And I'll turn to that next, right? So Descartes' doubting reality, there is no reality really to begin with, or at least I have to come to it in his methodology, but I start by doubting it. Now, Husserl, what's different, right? Husserl is not concerned about whether reality exists or not. He's not questioning. He does think it exists, to be sure, but it's not a question of I doubt that reality exists and I got to come to it. No, Husserl wants to study how reality is given to us in experience, how reality is given to us in its appearance, right? So there's also a difference there in that Husserl's not doubting its existence. He just wants to study how it's given to us, the manner in which it's given to us, right? That's studying phenomena, right? Now, what Husserl wants to do, though, is bracket everything, right? So I want to come to the transcendence and the pure ego. So I bracket, right, the natural attitude, right? I bracket its existential values, so to speak, and I move to its phenomenal values. How is it appearing to me, right? And he uses this a lot in aesthetics, and it's very helpful. So that's a major difference between Husserl's method and Cartesian method. Now, Husserl admittedly is pretty transcendental in his phenomenology, and he tends to subjectivize, you could say, epistemological experience. So what's different from him, say, from like Stein, von Hildebrand, Hedwig Conrad Martius, Max Scheler, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, right? Well, I think a fundamental difference is they don't start with bracketing. They look at things within metaphysical co-principles, right? So like for Hedwig Conrad Martius and Edith Stein, who followed a lot in the way of Hedwig Conrad Martius, they look at things in accordance with like act and potency, form and matter. So right, it's called ontological phenomenology. For Martius specifically. So right, if you study, you can still study the appearing of the rock, right? Its givenness in experience, its primary datum, to use modern terms. But you start to experience its qualities, right? And accidents, so to speak, and you come to know what is like, so to speak, substantial, what is like intrinsic, right? And so say you're holding a rock, you can study appearing and you can understand that color is not necessarily necessary, it's accidental, right, to use Aristotelian terms. But then Martius would note that heaviness is something intrinsic to the rock, so you can start to posit things about its existence and come to the essence of rock, so to speak, right? And that's what phenomenology does through eidetic reductionism. So there is a sort of bracketing for Martius, more so, and Hildebrand as well. Stein takes a little bit of a different approach. With her realism, she, and this is because she was influenced by Thomas Aquinas late in her life, focuses on like act and potency. So, right, we have Descartes doubts reality, I think therefore I am. For Stein as well as Husserl, it's the I think I am, self-evident. But then also we come to this idea of an objective reality through the idea of act and potency for Edith Stein. Because the transcendent ego, she admits that there's a certain transcendence that man is seeking, right? I think a lot of people would agree with that. But what's different for Stein is that it's not fully within the immanent subject, she would say, right? So if you think about it in this way, right, act and potency, in the sense that man could actualize certain potentialities in the future, right? Use your faculty of memory to picture and anticipate future actualities, such as increasing in virtue, so to speak, or actualizing your skill for golf or reading, whatever it is, right? So there's man in a sort of temporality in time, and you can also think of instances of, right, what is or what already was, right? So you've thought about what could be the future, but you also can think about what is not, or what was, right? So you can think about past potencies, right? Man in the past, right? And what that shows you is a limitedness to the being, right? Being is in temporal time. There's a temporality, and he's being sustained by an absolute actual being, right? And this would be God, right? So Edith Stein very much uses a phenomenological method, but kind of coincides with the Thomistic Aristotelian metaphysics to understand the structure of reality and understand reality itself, right? Through her phenomenology. But she doesn't bracket, right? Notice she just starts straight up with a formal ontology. So that would be a difference from Husserl. But even Husserl and his transcendental phenomenology is still different. I hope you can see that now from the Cartesian method. He's not doubting everything. He's studying how it's given. And in that way, though some would argue against this, but I think this is what Husserl's doing. In that way, he's presupposing a reality, and he indicates that in the logical investigations, especially part 1. But then he also thinks that your existence is self-evident. It's not a logical principle or a proposition that needs to be demonstrated. It's something that's given, it's self-evident, and yes, it is subjective, but you come to a certain reality, such as the acting subject, intersubjective acts, right? Understanding mind-matter harmony, right? The psychophysical structure, what they call it. So Husserl himself differs very much so from the Cartesian method. So I hope this helped to clarify phenomenology and its method and what it takes from Cartesian methodology, but very much so how it differs. Yeah, if you have any more questions, please ask, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. God bless.